Evelyn Harper was 3 miles from dying, and she knew it. Dusty's legs were giving out beneath her each step slower than the last, and the August sun in New Mexico territory didn't care about either of them. She had sold everything, left everyone, chosen the road over the wreckage of a life she no longer recognized. And now the road was killing her horse. Then she saw the cottonwoods, and a man standing at the fence watching her like he'd been expecting her for years. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow Evelyn all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The first thing Evelyn Harper noticed about the man at the fence was that he didn't move. Most men, when they saw a woman riding alone in that condition, horse half-broken dress, soaked through with sweat, no wagon, no escort, most men either ran toward her or ran the other direction. Both were reactions born from the same instinct. Something's wrong. Deal with it or avoid it. This man did neither. He just stood there with one boot propped on the lower rail and his arms resting across the top, watching her come down the road like he had nowhere else to be, and nothing more pressing to consider. Evelyn slowed Dusty to a walk. The mare was grateful for it. She could feel the shudder running through the horse's legs, with every step the way Dusty's neck had stopped lifting, the way it used to, the subtle droop that meant the animal was running on stubbornness alone. Just like her owner. She pulled up about 10 yards from the fence and looked at him straight. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, she guessed. Dark hair gone a little long under a sweat-stained hat. Jaw set like a man who didn't waste words on things that didn't require them. His eyes were light gray or green, she couldn't tell from that distance, and they were doing exactly what hers were doing. Taking inventory. She spoke first. My horse needs water. He didn't blink. I can see that. Is there a well? There is. Can she use it? A pause, not a rude one, the kind a man takes when he's actually thinking instead of just filling silence with noise. You can water your horse, he said. The well holds. 3 seconds of quiet passed between them. The kind of quiet that meant something, though Evelyn couldn't have said what. She dismounted. Her legs nearly buckled when her boots hit the ground. She'd been in the saddle since before dawn, and the heat had done something ugly to her knees. She gripped the saddle horn until the feeling came back, making sure her face gave nothing away. She'd learned that much at least. Whatever fell apart on the inside, stayed on the inside. The man, she didn't know his name yet, opened the fence gate without being asked. Trough's around back, he said. I'll show you. He didn't wait to see if she'd follow. He just walked, and she led Dusty behind him, and the mare's hooves scraped against the dry ground with a sound like exhaustion made audible. The ranch was modest, but intentional. That was the word that came to her. Everything placed with a reason. The barn set back at the right angle to catch the morning shade. The fence lines straight and sound. A kitchen garden running along the south wall, something green pushing up through the cracked earth that had no business being green in this heat. Someone had worked hard to make this place survive. The water trough was full and clean, and Dusty didn't wait for permission. She dropped her nose in and drank with the single-minded desperation of an animal that had been afraid for hours. Evelyn watched her and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was wound tight. She going to be all right? He asked. He was standing a few feet back, not crowding them. She'll need rest, a day, maybe 2. Then rest her. Evelyn looked at him. I didn't ask to stay. No, he said. You didn't. He turned and walked back toward the barn. His name was Caleb Morgan. She learned that from the other man, the one who came out of the kitchen door 20 minutes later carrying a tin cup of water and wearing an expression like he'd been waiting all day for company and had long since given up hope of getting any. Mateo Delgado, he said, pressing the cup into her hand before she could refuse it. Cook, fence mender, occasional philosopher. You look like you need all 3. The water was cool. She didn't ask how. She just drank it. Evelyn Harper, she said. Where you headed, Miss Harper? Santa Fe. Mateo looked at Dusty, who was still drinking. Then he looked at the road behind her. Then he looked at Evelyn with the specific expression of a man doing arithmetic that he didn't much like the answer to. "Santa Fe's 40 miles east," he said. "I know where it is." "Your horse won't make 40 miles, not today." "I know that too." He nodded slowly, like a man confirming a thing he already believed. "So you'll stay the night then?" "I didn't say that." "No," he said. "But your horse did." Yeah, she stayed the night. She told herself it was a practical decision, because it was. Dusty needed rest, and pushing the mare in this heat was the kind of cruelty Evelyn refused to be capable of, no matter how much road she needed to cover. So she accepted the use of the barn, spread her bedroll in the empty stall next to Dusty, and that was that. What she didn't account for was the smell of food. Mateo cooked like a man who understood that cooking was the most honest form of argument. By the time the sun hit the horizon, the smell coming from the ranch kitchen had worked its way into the barn and proceeded to dismantle every intention Evelyn had of keeping to herself. When she appeared in the doorway, he didn't look surprised. "Sit down," he said. "There's more than enough." Caleb Morgan was already at the table. He looked up when she came in, gave one of those slow, assessing looks that she was starting to recognize as his version of hello, and then looked back down at his plate. She sat across from him. For a while there was only the sound of forks and the occasional pop from the wood stove. Then Caleb said, without looking up, "You rode in from the west." "That's right." "Nothing for 60 miles west of here but empty road." "That's also right. So you came from somewhere before that?" "Everyone comes from somewhere before somewhere," she said. He looked up then. There was something in his expression she hadn't expected. Not annoyance, not curiosity exactly. More like recognition. Like she'd said something he'd said himself once in a different way. "Fair enough," he said. Mateo caught her eye from across the kitchen and said absolutely nothing, which said everything. She should have left the next morning. Dusty was better not fully recovered, but better enough. Evelyn was awake before Light had the mare brushed and saddled before the kitchen smoke started rising, and was standing at the gate with one boot in the stirrup when she heard the sound. Metal on metal. Irregular hollow. She turned. Caleb was at the well crank, and something was wrong with the mechanism. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened on every pull, the handle catching on something. It shouldn't. The bucket coming up slower than it should the creak of old iron that had been pushed past its tolerance. She stood there for a moment, watched him work it, watched him not ask for help. She took her boot out of the stirrup. "The crank plate's warped," she said. "You need to angle the handle 18 degrees left before you pull, or you'll strip the threads entirely." He stopped, looked at her. "How do you know that?" "My father had a well with the same problem for 6 years before he figured it out. Wasted 2 replacements before someone showed him the angle trick." Silence. "Show me," Caleb said. She showed him. It took 4 minutes. When the bucket came up smooth and full, neither of them said anything about it. She just wiped her hands on her skirt, and he watched the water level drop and resettle in the bucket, and the morning went on around them. "You're not in any hurry," he said finally. It wasn't a question exactly. Not an invitation either. Just an observation placed in the air between them to see what she'd do with it. "I'm always in a hurry," she said. "I just don't always move fast." He thought about that. "Breakfast'll be ready in 20 minutes, he said. "If you want it before you go." She stayed for breakfast, and then she stayed to help mend the section of fence line that had come down in the south pasture overnight because Mateo mentioned it at the table, and she could see Caleb running numbers in his head, how long it would take one man, what it would cost the morning's work. And she wasn't the kind of woman who sat still while useful things needed doing. By noon, she hadn't left. By late afternoon, nobody mentioned it. It was Mateo who told her what the ranch was really built on. They were in the kitchen, her shelling peas from the garden, him stirring something slow and patient on the stove, and he talked the way men do when they're not really talking to you, but to the room, to the history soaked into the walls. "Caleb built this place from nothing," Mateo said. 8 years ago, this was nothing but rock and heat and a broken-down claim nobody wanted. He stayed when every sensible man left. Why did he stay? Mateo paused over the pot. Because he didn't have anywhere else he wanted to be. That's a different thing than having nowhere to go. He glanced at her sideways. You understand the difference, Miss Harper. She did. She understood it exactly. The well's the thing, Mateo continued, quieter now. Everything here runs from that well. It's the only reason the cattle survived last summer's dry spell. It's the only reason the garden grows. It's... He stopped. Caleb says the well is why the ranch lives. I think the ranch lives because Caleb refuses to let it die. But the well is what he believes in, so the well is what matters. She thought about that for a long time afterward, that a man could pour his faith into a hole in the ground, that the thing you believed in didn't have to be grand or complicated, that survival sustained long enough, quietly enough, could become something that looked almost like grace. On the third day, something happened that she didn't anticipate. She went to the barn to check Dusty's left foreleg. There'd been a slight unevenness in the mare's gait the evening before, something she wanted to watch, and when she crouched down to run her hand along the tendon, she found the shoe. The left rear shoe was half pulled. A nail worked loose, the shoe hanging at an angle that would cause a real injury if the mare was pushed to travel before it was fixed. Evelyn sat back on her heels and looked at it. She was not a superstitious woman. She believed in work and weather and the straightforward logic of cause and effect. She did not believe that circumstances arranged themselves with intention or that the universe sent messages through horseshoe nails. But she sat there for a full minute, just looking at it. Then Caleb's voice came from behind her. How bad? She hadn't heard him come in. She stood and turned. The rear left shoe's pulled. She can't travel on it. He nodded like he'd half expected it, crossed his arms, and looked at the mare. Nearest farrier's in Redvale. Day-and-a-half ride. I know. So you'll stay until he can get out here. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation either. It was just the next logical fact in a sequence of logical facts stated plainly by a plain man. It seems that way, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, There's a room in the house. Second door on the left. It's got a decent mattress and a window that faces east. You'll sleep better there than in the barn. I don't want to trouble. You fixed my well crank, he said. You mended 40 yards of fence line. You're not trouble. He turned and walked out. She stood in the barn for another long moment, listening to Dusty shift in the stall, listening to the dry summer wind move across the roof. She thought about Santa Fe, about the reasons she'd been heading there, about the thing she'd been running toward or away from. She was no longer entirely certain which. She thought about the well. The well holds. And for reasons she could not explain to herself, that evening, those words felt less like a statement about water than like a promise about something else entirely. That night, she moved into the room with the east-facing window. She set her bag down in the corner, sat on the edge of the mattress, which was in fact decent, looked out at the dark shape of the land. The stars punched through the black sky above New Mexico territory, like someone had been careless with a lantern. She hadn't slept in a real bed in 3 weeks. She didn't sleep that night either. But it wasn't road weariness keeping her awake. It wasn't grief, though there was grief. It wasn't fear, though. There was that too. It was something quieter than all of those things. She lay there and listened to the ranch settle around her, the creak of wood cooling in the night air, the distant sound of cattle somewhere in the dark, the well chain swaying slightly in the breeze, and she tried to identify the feeling sitting in her chest. It took her a long time. When she finally named it, she made herself say it out loud quietly, just to the room and the dark, and no one else. Safe. She hadn't felt safe in a very long time. She pressed her lips together and turned toward the wall and let the ranch go on breathing around her. At breakfast the next morning, Mateo set a cup of coffee at her place before she sat down, which was the kind of small thing that landed differently when a person had been living without small kindnesses. Caleb was already outside. She could see him through the window checking the fence line that ran alongside the eastern pasture. "He does that every morning," Mateo said, noticing where she was looking. "Checks the whole perimeter. Started when he first built the place, never stopped, even when nothing's wrong." "Especially then." Mateo poured his own coffee. "He says you can't know something's still standing unless you keep looking." Evelyn wrapped both hands around her cup. "That's either wisdom," she said, "or stubbornness." Mateo smiled. "Out here, Miss Harper, they're mostly the same thing." She spent the morning in the kitchen garden. Nobody asked her to. Nobody assigned her to it. She simply looked at it after breakfast and saw what it needed. The tomato plant starting to bow without support. A section of the beanstalks that had worked loose the herbs at the east end, getting crowded out by something that had no business being there, and she went to work. She was on her knees pulling the interloper weeds when she heard Boots stop beside her. She didn't look up. "I know I didn't ask." "I wasn't going to say you needed to," Caleb said. A pause. She kept pulling weeds. He didn't leave. "The beans have been a problem since June," he said. "Can't figure out if it's the soil or the water timing." "It's the water timing," she said. "And the crowding. They need more room, and they need water at dusk, not midday." "How do you know about beans?" She finally looked up at him. He was standing with his thumbs hooked in his belt hat pushed back slightly on his head, the sun doing something specific to the angles of his face that she had no reason to notice, and noticed anyway. "I know about a lot of things," she said. "I've had to." He studied her for a moment in that way he had, measuring, but not unkind. More like a man who'd learned that people were complicated and didn't want to make the mistake of deciding too fast. "Mateo says you're a widow," he said. The word landed like a stone in still water. "Mateo talks," she said. "He does." She turned back to the weeds. "I was a wife. I was a lot of things. The widow part came last." Quiet. Then, "I'm sorry for that." The simple plainness of it, no performance, no reaching for the right condolence language, made her throat tighten in a way she didn't entirely expect. "I've been sorry about it too," she said. "I'm getting less sorry, which is either healing or forgetting, and I haven't decided which one yet." She heard him make a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something more rueful and more real than a laugh. "Yeah," he said, like she'd described something he recognized. "Yeah, I know that particular kind of not knowing." She looked at him. He looked back. And there was something in the air between them, not a declaration, not a promise, not anything so large or named as that. Just the quiet acknowledgement of two people who had both been through something hard and were still standing in the sun on the other side of it. "I'll shift the bean watering to dusk," he said. "They'll do better for it." "All right then." He walked back toward the barn. She watched him go. Then she put her hands back in the dirt and kept working, because the work was there and the work needed doing, and because some feelings were best honored by ignoring them until she understood exactly what they were. The morning burned on around her, bright and dry and relentless. The well held, and Evelyn Harper, who had been 3 miles from dying just 4 days ago, pressed her hands into the soil of a ranch she didn't own, and did not let herself think about how much that soil felt like something she had been missing without knowing it had a name. She found the secondary water source on a Tuesday. She knew it was Tuesday because she'd been counting days without meaning to, the way a person counts things when they're trying to convince themselves that time is still moving in a direction they control. It had been 11 days since she rode into Morgan Creek Ranch on a dying horse. The farrier had come and gone. Dusty's shoe was fixed clean and sound, the mare rested and ready. There was no practical reason left for Evelyn Harper to be standing on a ridge a half-mile east of the ranch with a hand-drawn survey map and Caleb Morgan at her shoulder. No practical reason at all. "Here," she said. She pressed her boot into the ground. The give beneath it was different from the surrounding soil, slight but real, The kind of difference her father had spent 20 years teaching her to feel. Right here. The ground's wetter than it should be at this elevation. There's water moving below us. Caleb crouched down, pressed his palm flat against the earth. Stayed like that for a long moment. I've walked this ridge 100 times, he said. You weren't looking for it. He stood, looked at the land around them, and she could see him recalculating things, 8 years of assumptions about his own property rearranging themselves inside his head. If this feeds the main well, he said slowly. It does. I'm certain of it. The elevation, the soil composition, the way the water rose that summer with no rain, it's all consistent. She folded the map. And it's on your land, Caleb, 20 yards inside your eastern boundary. He turned and looked at her. Voss doesn't know, he said. It wasn't a question. The county survey didn't capture it. His survey men wouldn't have found it either, not without knowing what to look for. The quiet between them had a different quality than usual. Charged, like the air before a storm decides what it's going to do. This changes things, he said. It changes everything, she said. You're not just defending a well. You're sitting on a water system that feeds the whole valley's underground supply. That's not a property dispute anymore. That's a resource claim. Federal, potentially. He stared at her. Federal, he repeated. Your father was a surveyor, she said, and heard herself using the words he'd thrown back at her, once her own history as an argument. You went with him every summer from age 8. Yes. Then you know what I mean when I say this isn't just a fight with Harlan Voss anymore. He was quiet for a long time. The morning burned around them dry and merciless and vast. Then he said, I need you to help me document it. She should have said she was leaving. She'd had Dusty saddled and ready 4 days running, and 4 days running, something had pulled her back. The first day it was the fence survey she'd offered to complete. The second day, it was the water documentation she'd started and couldn't leave half-finished. The third day, Mateo had said something at breakfast so unexpectedly funny that she'd laughed until her ribs hurt, and somehow by the end of breakfast, she was still there. The fourth day, she hadn't even tried to explain it to herself. All right, she said. She said it like it was a simple word about a simple thing. It was neither. They spent 3 days documenting the secondary source measurements, soil samples, her hand-drawn maps building on her father's methods, detailed notes about water pressure and flow direction, and the specific geological markers that connected the ridge source to the main well. Caleb worked beside her the whole time, not supervising, not directing, just working as if the thing they were doing together was the most natural arrangement in the world. On the second day, she caught him watching her work. Not the casual glance of a man checking progress. The sustained attention of someone watching something he finds genuinely worth watching. She kept her eyes on the survey paper. You're staring, Mr. Morgan. Caleb, he said immediately. She looked up. He had the expression of a man who'd surprised himself. You keep saying Mr. Morgan, he said, quieter now. You've called me Caleb 3 times when you weren't thinking about it. The formal version feels... He stopped. Deliberate, she offered. Yes. A beat. Is it? She held his gaze. I suppose it was. In the beginning. And now, she looked back down at her work. Now I'm not sure what it is. He didn't push. That was the thing about him, she kept landing on the way he asked a question and then gave the answer room to be complicated. Most men wanted resolution fast. Caleb Morgan seemed to understand that the important things took time to become clear and that rushing them ruined them. It was, she thought, an unusually rare quality in a human being. The evening of the third day, they were sitting at the kitchen table with the completed documentation spread between them when a rider came hard up the road. Evelyn heard the hoofbeats first, the speed of them. Caleb was already moving toward the door before she stood. The rider was one of the hands from the Delray spread 3 miles north, a young man named Cole, 16 at most, looking like he'd been riding fast since before his breakfast settled. Mr. Morgan. He was breathing hard. Mr. Morgan, you need to hear this. Catch your breath first, Caleb said. Steady. Even now, even with tension written across every line of the boy's face, Caleb Morgan's voice did not shift. Cole pulled in a breath. "There's a legal man in Redvale. Came in yesterday on the stage from Santa Fe. He's been meeting with the county clerk and Mr. Voss since last night." Another breath. "Word is he's carrying paperwork on a water rights dispute. Morgan Creek specifically. Cole heard it from the clerk's wife herself." The kitchen went absolutely silent. Mateo stopped moving at the stove. Evelyn looked at Caleb. His jaw had gone tight, but his voice stayed level. "What kind of paperwork?" "Mrs. Aldrich didn't know the details," Cole said. "But she said the legal man asked specifically about the boundary description on the Morgan Creek claim, the cottonwood markers." Evelyn felt something cold run through her. The cottonwood markers. The ambiguous boundary language she'd found 3 weeks ago in that documentation. The fourth tree that might not be standing anymore. She'd told him to get the paperwork reviewed. She'd told him this exact thing was coming. She looked at Caleb. He was already looking at her. "How much time?" he said. Not to the boy, to her. "Not much," she said. "If they're already meeting with the county clerk, they've started the formal process. You need to get to Redvale, fast, before anything gets filed. The documentation we finished today, take it with you, all of it. And take the original land claim. I can't leave the ranch unattended, not right now with Voss." "I'll stay," she said. The words came out before she'd decided to say them. Both of them went still. "Evelyn." "I'll stay," she said again. Steady. "Mateo's here. And I know where the rifle is, and I know how to use it, and I know what Voss looks like. You need to go to Redvale. You need to go today." He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that Cole shifted uncomfortably on his feet, and Mateo turned back to the stove with the tact of a man who had seen too many important moments to interrupt one. "You'd do that," Caleb said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was more like a man confirming something he needed to hear said out loud. "I'm already doing it," she said. He pulled in a breath, held it, let it go. "I'll be back in 2 days," he said. "Take 3 if you need them. Do it right." He held her gaze for one more count, then he turned and started for the barn with the focused efficiency of a man who'd decided and wasn't going back. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him go, and the feeling in her chest was something she was going to have to think about very carefully once there was time. There was not currently time. "Cole," she said to the boy, "have you eaten?" "No, ma'am." "Sit down." Mateo feed him. Mateo was already moving. She went to the desk and started going through the documentation one more time, because if there was a legal challenge incoming, and she was the one holding this property for the next 3 days, she was going to know every word of every piece of paper in that folder by the time Caleb came home. She stopped. Came home. She'd thought it like it was a fact. She pressed her lips together and kept reading. The first day without Caleb was fine. She kept herself busy enough that fine was genuinely the accurate word. She walked the fence line in the morning, all of it, the full perimeter, the way he did every day without fail, and she understood for the first time why he did it. Not just because things needed checking, because the walking itself was a kind of conversation with the land, a daily confirmation I am here. I am still here. This is still mine. She talked to Dusty in the afternoon, which she'd always done, and had always been slightly embarrassed about, and was not embarrassed about here. She helped Mateo in the kitchen garden until the evening light went gold and flat. She did not think about the way Caleb's face had looked when she'd said, "I'll stay." She thought about it constantly. The second day trouble came before breakfast. She heard the wagon on the road and went to the porch and recognized one of Voss's hands on the seat. She knew the man by sight now had cataloged all 3 of the regular riders. He slowed at the fence line and looked at the ranch with the particular kind of looking that is really a message. "Mr. Morgan around," he called out. "Mr. Morgan's on his business," she said from the porch. "I'm here in his place." The hand looked at her for a long moment. "And who are you exactly?" "Someone with a rifle and a good reason to use it if someone interferes with this property," she said pleasantly. Anything else? A pause. The man looked at the ranch. At her. At the rifle she hadn't bothered to hide. Tell Morgan Voss sends his regards, he said. I'll do that, she said. He drove on. Her hands were completely steady, she was pleased to note. Mateo came out of the kitchen behind her. You sounded like you meant it. I did mean it. You've gotten very comfortable protecting someone else's property. She turned to look at him. Mateo had the expression he wore when he was being wise and using the most casual possible delivery for it. I'm comfortable protecting things worth protecting, she said. He disappeared back into the kitchen. Coffee's ready. That night, she sat at the desk and wrote a letter she didn't send to anyone. It wasn't unusual for her. She'd kept a kind of running private correspondence with her own thoughts since she was young, the page a way of figuring out what she actually believed before she had to live with it. She wrote about the ranch, about the way it had started to feel like something rather than somewhere. She wrote about Mateo, who was the most genuinely good man she'd encountered in years, and who cooked like he thought meals were a form of love. She wrote about Dusty fully recovered and spirited again in the way only a rested horse could be the mare's health, a small daily reassurance. She wrote eventually about Caleb. She wrote, he is the most careful man I have ever known. Not careful like afraid. Careful like a man who has thought about what he values and decided to protect it. She wrote, I think I have been afraid of exactly that quality in a person, because it is the quality that makes you believe they might actually stay. She wrote, I have not believed in anyone staying in a very long time. She stared at what she'd written. Then she closed the notebook and went to bed. Caleb came back on the afternoon of the third day. She heard Dusty react first. The mare lifted her head and turned toward the road, in that particular way horses had of recognizing familiar things before humans could, and Evelyn turned from the fence she'd been checking and saw him coming up the road, and something unwound in her chest that she hadn't realized was coiled. He dismounted at the barn, and she walked over, and they stood for a moment in that charged way that had become their particular greeting, taking stock of each other without quite admitting they were doing it. How was Red Vale? She said. Productive. He was tired. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. The legal man Voss brought in his name is Harnett. He's good. He found the Cottonwood issue before I even got there. Her stomach tightened. And the county clerk was about to start proceedings on a boundary review. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. This stopped it, temporarily. She took the document. Read it fast. It was a counterfiling, a formal assertion of the original claim's validity, citing the water rights documentation, and specifically referencing an undisclosed secondary water source as material to the claim's scope. Her documentation. Her survey work. Your lawyer submitted this, she said. I don't have a lawyer. I wrote it myself using your notes as the basis. A pause. The clerk almost didn't accept it. Then I showed him the survey map with the secondary source marked. He got very quiet and told me I should speak to the Territorial Land Office in Santa Fe directly. She looked up. Santa Fe. The scope of what you found, if the underground source feeds as wide an area as your survey suggests, it falls under territorial jurisdiction, not county. He held her gaze. Voss was playing a county game, Evelyn. You turned it into a territorial matter. He doesn't have the connections in Santa Fe that he has in Red Vale. The weight of what that meant settled over her. You need to go to Santa Fe, she said. I need to go to Santa Fe. He agreed. A beat. That's 2 weeks' ride. Yes. She looked at the document in her hands. This buys you how long? The clerk said 60 days before the county review proceeds, assuming no further challenge. He paused. Harnett's already sent a rider to Santa Fe on Voss's behalf. We need to get there first. She stood there for a moment with the document and the implications of it and the specific look on his face, the look of a man who'd done everything right and knew it still might not be enough. Mateo can manage the ranch, she said. For 2 weeks, maybe. The cattle rotation alone. "I'll stay," she said. The silence that followed was different from any silence that had come before it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "that's 2 more weeks. I know how long 2 weeks is. You came here to water your horse. You've been here—" He stopped, started again. "Why are you still here?" She could have given him any number of practical answers, and they all would have been true, and none of them would have been the whole truth. She gave him the closest honest thing she had. "Because something kept giving me a reason," she said, "and I stopped arguing with it." He looked at her for a very long time. She waited. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," he said. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Something quiet and certain, the way the well was quiet, and certain the way the things that held were always quiet about it. "I'll be here," she said. He nodded once. Then he went to see to his horse. Mateo found her standing there a few minutes later, still holding the legal document, not quite ready to move. "He's going to Santa Fe," Mateo said. "Yes." "And you're staying?" "Yes." A pause. "You know," Mateo said with the gentle precision of a man choosing his moment, "I've worked for Caleb Morgan for 6 years. In that time, I've seen him turn down 2 good offers on this ranch stay through a winter that nearly killed both of us and refuse help from every person who offered it." He paused. "You're the first person he's ever let help him." She turned to look at Mateo. "That's what you're doing," he said simply. "In case you wondered what it was." She turned back toward the ranch. The late afternoon sun was doing something warm and particular to the land, the dry grass, the straight fence lines, the cottonwoods along the east ridge that were 3 and should have been 4, and now carried the entire weight of a legal battle in their remaining roots. The well, the thing that held everything. "Make supper, Mateo," she said, her voice steady. "Already started," he said, and she walked back toward the house. The house with the east-facing window and the decent mattress and the desk full of paperwork that had become her project, her purpose, her reason, and did not let herself think too carefully about the fact that she had said, "I'll be here," like she already knew it was true. She had said it the way Caleb Morgan talked about his well, like something that simply held. Caleb left on a Thursday. She watched him ride out at first light with his saddlebags packed and the documentation folder secured under his coat, and she stood at the fence until the road dust settled back down and there was nothing left to look at. Then she turned around and went to work. That was the thing about having a purpose. It didn't leave room for the other feelings to take up too much space. And Evelyn Harper had learned in the years since she'd buried her husband and sold the farm and put everything she owned into 2 saddlebags. That purpose was the most reliable thing a person could carry. It didn't weigh anything. It didn't spoil in the heat. It didn't abandon you on an empty road in August. She spent the first morning reorganizing the cattle rotation schedule Caleb had left her, cross-referencing it against the water trough access points and the condition of the south pasture fence. Mateo watched her work through breakfast with an expression of quiet satisfaction, like a man watching something he'd predicted come true. "You're running this place like you've done it before," he said. "I've done something like it before," she said without looking up. "My husband's farm wasn't cattle, but land is land. It needs the same things everywhere." "What does it need?" She looked up then. "Attention. Consistency. Someone who shows up every day whether they feel like it or not." Mateo nodded slowly. "That's what Caleb does." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm doing it while he's gone." The first 3 days were quiet in the way the eye of a storm is quiet. Not peaceful, just temporarily still. She walked the perimeter every morning the way Caleb did, talked to the cattle hands about the rotation, managed the water schedule, worked in the garden in the evenings when the heat broke slightly. She wrote detailed notes about everything she observed because she intended to give Caleb a full accounting when he returned, and because the writing kept her anchored. On the 4th day, Harnett showed up. Not Voss. Voss himself didn't come. He sent his lawyer instead, which was a different kind of message cleaner, more dangerous, dressed in a good coat and carrying a leather satchel. Evelyn was at the well when the buggy came up the road. She didn't go to meet it. She finished what she was doing first, recorded the water level in the notebook she'd started keeping for exactly this purpose, and then walked to the fence at her own pace. Harnett was a narrow man with careful eyes, and the particular kind of patience that came from being paid well to wait. He looked at her the way lawyers looked at unexpected variables assessing recalculating. "I'm looking for Caleb Morgan," he said. "Mr. Morgan isn't here," she said. "And you are. Someone with authority to speak for this property in his absence." She held his gaze. "What do you want, Mr. Harnett?" He smiled. It was a professional smile, which meant it was not a real one. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Voss to discuss a voluntary resolution to the current water rights situation. A resolution that would benefit both parties before this becomes a lengthy territorial matter." "Before Mr. Morgan's filing in Santa Fe is reviewed, you mean?" Something flickered behind his eyes. "Word travels fast. Mr. Morgan documented everything before he left," she said, "including the timeline of Mr. Voss's approach, including the damage to the south fence line, including 3 separate observations of Voss riders at the property boundary at hours inconsistent with casual travel." She paused. "If we're discussing resolution, that documentation exists and has been filed in 2 separate locations." Harnett looked at her for a long moment. "You're not his wife," he said. "No," she said. "Then what exactly is your—" "I'm the person standing at this fence right now," she said. "Which is what matters." Another long pause. "Tell Mr. Morgan," Harnett said finally, "that Mr. Voss's offer remains open. But it won't remain open indefinitely." "I'll tell him," she said. "Good day, Mr. Harnett." She turned and walked back to the well. She didn't let her shoulders drop until she heard the buggy moving back down the road. Mateo was at the kitchen window. She knew he'd watched the whole thing. She came inside and sat down, and he put coffee in front of her without a word. "You did well," he said. "He's going to escalate," she said. "He came himself because Caleb going to Santa Fe worried them. Now he knows Caleb isn't here." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "That means Voss's next move comes before Caleb gets back." Mateo sat down across from her. He had the expression he got when he was thinking something serious that he wasn't sure he should say. "Say it," she said. "Voss has friends in this county that go deeper than the clerk," Mateo said. "There was a man 2 years ago, small spread on the north side of the valley, had a water source on his land that Voss wanted. After 6 months of pressure, the man's barn burned down." The kitchen went quiet. "It was ruled an accident," Mateo said. "Was it an accident?" Mateo looked at her steadily. "What do you think?" She thought about the fence posts pulled in the night. She thought about Harnett's careful smile and Voss's patience, the specific patience of a man who'd done this before and knew how it ended. "I think," she said carefully, "that we need to not be alone out here. Cole's family is 3 miles north. He's offered before. Send for him," she said. "Tell him we need an extra hand for the next week. Pay him fairly. Don't explain more than that." Mateo nodded and stood. "And Mateo," he paused, "don't tell Caleb in your letter." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because he can't do anything about it from Santa Fe except worry, and worrying will make him rush, and rushing will cost him the filing." She held the cook's gaze. "We handle this. He handles that. That's the arrangement." Mateo studied her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not quite admiration, not quite something else. Something between the two. "You know," he said quietly, "when you rode in here 3 weeks ago on that half-dead horse, I thought you were just another woman passing through." "I was," she said. "No," he said. "You weren't. You just didn't know it yet." He went to send for Cole. She sat alone in the kitchen and drank her coffee and did not think about what Mateo had just said, because thinking about it required thinking about things she wasn't ready to think about in the middle of a crisis. Cole arrived the next morning before dawn, which was exactly the right time, because Voss's men came at noon. Not 3 riders this time, 5. and they didn't slow at the fence line. They came up the road with intention in every hoofbeat, and the one in front wasn't a hand. He was the foreman, a big man named Reese that Mateo had warned her about, a man who'd worked for Voss for 12 years and had learned to carry his employer's confidence like a weapon. Evelyn was on the porch when they came. She had the rifle across her knees. Cole was at the corner of the barn, visible, but still. Mateo was in the kitchen doorway. Reese pulled up at the fence and looked at the three of them with the particular contempt of a man who expected obstacles to move. "This is Voss Cattle Company business," he said. "We're here to survey the eastern boundary per the county review notice issued this morning." Something cold hit the back of her throat. County review notice. This morning. Harnett had moved faster than she'd expected. "There's been no notice delivered to this property," she said. Her voice was even. Her hands were steady. "Nothing official can proceed without notice to the property holder." "Notice was posted at the county office," Reese said. "Mr. Morgan had 30 days to object. Mr. Morgan is not here." "Mr. Morgan filed a counterclaim in Santa Fe," she said. "That counterclaim supersedes county proceedings." Reese looked at her with flat eyes. "Says who?" "Says the Territorial Land Ordinance of 1871, she said, which established that water rights disputes touching federal survey land fall under territorial, not county jurisdiction. She'd spent 2 nights memorizing that language from the documents Caleb had left behind. "If your employer's lawyer hasn't told him that Mr. Reese, then Mr. Voss is paying for very poor counsel." The silence stretched. Reese's horse shifted. "You're a woman on someone else's ranch," he said. "I'm a person with a rifle on private property," she said, which is the relevant fact. Reese looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him with 17 years of uncomplicated directness and didn't blink. Reese looked back at Evelyn. "This ain't finished," he said. "I know it isn't," she said. "Come back with a proper territorial notice, and you'll find Mr. Morgan here to receive it." They left. Cole let out a breath that was almost a whistle. "Ma'am, where did you learn to talk like that?" 4 years of land dispute," she said. "Get the horses watered. I need to write a letter." She went inside and wrote to Caleb. She told herself she wouldn't alarm him, and she kept that promise. She didn't tell him about the riders, didn't tell him about the threat in Reese's eyes. But she told him about the county review notice. She told him what she'd said about the territorial ordinance. She told him he needed to get the Santa Fe filing expedited, that Voss wasn't waiting for 60 days, that the whole timeline had compressed. She told him the ranch was fine. She told him to hurry. She sealed the letter and sent Cole with it to the relay station in Redvale, and then she stood at the desk in the small room and put both hands flat on the wood and looked at the wall and took 4 deliberate breaths. Then she went back to work. The next 5 days were a kind of war conducted in paperwork and silence, and the daily performance of normalcy. She walked the fence every morning. She managed the cattle. She kept notes. She slept lightly and woke fast and kept the rifle within reach. She also, because life did not stop for crises, kept watering the kitchen garden at dusk, the way Caleb had started doing after she'd suggested it, and the beans were coming in better than they had all summer, and she found she cared about that more than was strictly rational. On the 8th day, the well dropped. She noticed it in the morning when she drew water. The bucket took longer to hit the surface. Not dramatically 3 seconds more than the previous day, 4 more than the day before that. Small differences. The kind most people wouldn't measure. She measured everything. She stood at the well for a long time after she noticed it. Then she walked back inside and sat at the desk and unfolded the survey maps and stared at them with the specific sick feeling of someone who has been right about something they desperately wanted to be wrong about. The drought. The dry spell that Voss had warned about at the fence line weeks ago, that she'd filed away as a threat and not taken seriously as a fact. It was a fact. The summer of 1883 was drying out faster than anyone had predicted, and the water table across the valley was dropping. And if the primary well at Morgan Creek dropped below a certain level before the secondary source could be formally accessed, she made herself stop. She stood up, walked to the kitchen. "Mateo," she said. He turned from the stove. "The well's dropping," she said. He didn't look surprised enough, which meant he'd noticed too and hadn't told her, which meant he'd been managing his own version of the not alarming people problem. "Since when?" she said. 4 days, he said quietly. 4 days and you didn't? I didn't want to worry you when there was nothing to be done about it. She pressed her lips together. She recognized that impulse. She'd just exercised it herself with Caleb. "How much have you seen it drop before?" she said, "in previous dry summers?" "Not like this." He paused. "This is different. 2 years ago we had 3 dry weeks and the level held. This year the heat's been consistent for 6 weeks and it's not breaking." He looked at her steadily. "Caleb knows his well. He's never seen it behave like this." She sat down, spread the survey maps on the table. "The secondary source," she said. "If we can access it directly, not wait for it to feed through the existing system, we could supplement the main well volume enough to sustain the cattle through a 6-week dry spell." "Can we access it directly?" "It would require opening the ground on the ridge, digging a channel to redirect the flow." She looked at the map. "It's not a small job. 2 days of hard work minimum. And if we get it wrong..." She met his eyes. "We could disrupt the existing feed entirely. The main well could drop faster, not slower." The kitchen was very quiet. "So we could save the ranch," Mateo said. "Or destroy it." "Yes," she said. "That's about right." He sat down across from her, looked at the maps, looked at her. "Can you do it right?" "My father did exactly this 3 times in his career. I helped with all 3. She paused. "I've never done it without him. That's not the same as not being able to do it." "No," she said. "It's not." He nodded. "Then what are you waiting for?" "Caleb," she said. "This is his ranch. This is his decision." Mateo was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you wait for Caleb, how long?" "A week, at least." "And the well in a week?" She already knew the answer. She'd done the math twice. "At current drop rate, the cattle start struggling in 10 days. The garden goes in 2 weeks. The well itself, functional well, maybe 3 weeks if we're lucky." "And Caleb's been gone 8 days." "Yes." Mateo folded his hands on the table. "So you can wait for him to come back and decide. Or you can make the decision that needs making and let him come back to a ranch that's still alive." She looked at the maps. She thought about her father, his hands on the ground, his voice telling her that water didn't wait for permission, that the land didn't care about human schedules, that the only question was whether you were going to move before the moment passed or after. She thought about Caleb, his face when he talked about this place. 8 years of showing up, 8 years of the daily choice to not let it die. She thought about what it would mean to be the person who either saved it or ruined it while he was gone. Both possibilities were enormous. Only one of them she could live with. "Cole," she said. The boy appeared from the doorway. She'd known he was within earshot. He usually was. "Ma'am, can you dig?" "Yes, ma'am." "Hard ground ridge soil." "I've done worse." She stood up. "Then we start at first light tomorrow. I need you to understand something before you agree." She looked at him directly. "This isn't guaranteed to work. If I've read the survey wrong, if my father's method doesn't hold in this geology, we could make things worse. You need to know that before you pick up a shovel." Cole looked at her steadily, with the specific seriousness of a young man who has been treated like someone whose opinion matters and is deciding to deserve it. "You haven't been wrong yet, Miss Harper," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "Get some sleep," she said. She stayed at the desk long after both of them had gone to bed, the map spread in front of her, going over her father's methods one more time. Running the numbers. Checking her assumptions against the survey data, against the geological markers, against every observation she'd made since the day she'd stood on that ridge and felt the ground give differently underfoot. At some point past midnight, she wrote in her notebook, "Father always said the water knows where it wants to go. The job isn't to force it. The job is to open the right door. She looked at what she'd written. Then she looked at the survey map. Then she closed the notebook and went to get some sleep, because tomorrow was going to be the hardest day she'd had since she rode in on a dying horse, and a man with light eyes told her the well held. She needed to make sure he was still right about that when he came home. She was at the ridge before the sun was fully up, Cole beside her with 2 shovels and a pick Mateo back at the ranch to manage the morning chores and keep watch on the road. She set the first stake exactly where the survey said it should go. Measured twice from the secondary markers. Checked her angle against the slope of the land. "Here," she said. Cole drove the pick in. The sound it made in the hard summer ground was like the sound of a bet being placed that you couldn't take back. She picked up the second shovel, and she started digging. 3 hours in, they hit wet soil. Not water, not yet. But the specific dark color and heavy weight of earth that had water moving beneath it not far down. She looked at it. Her hands were bleeding through her gloves. Her shoulders ached with the specific complaint of muscles that had been asked to do something real. She pressed her palm into the wet soil, the way her father had taught her, feeling for the direction of flow, the slight give that meant pressure from below rather than just moisture from above. She felt it, moving east, toward the ranch, just like she'd said. "Cole," she said, "we're in the right place." He leaned on his shovel and looked at her with dirt on his face, and something in his expression that was close to awe and trying to look like it wasn't. "How far down?" "Another foot, maybe 2. She stood up. "Keep going." They kept going. At 2 feet down the water came. Not a rush, not dramatic, just a quiet seeping. At first the ground beginning to give back what had been pressed into it from elsewhere, the slow, patient emergence of something that had been there the whole time, moving in the dark, waiting for someone to ask the right question in the right place. Evelyn crouched over it and watched it come and pressed her hands flat on either side of it, and felt the land doing what water did, finding its level, finding its path, finding the door she'd opened for it. "It's coming," Cole said. He was watching with both hands on his shovel handle and his mouth slightly open. "It's coming," she confirmed. She stood up. Her back ached, her hands hurt. The sun was fully up now and beating down with the particular cruelty of a New Mexico August afternoon. She didn't care about any of it. She walked to the crest of the ridge and looked down at the ranch, the barn, the fence lines, the kitchen garden, the well at the center of everything, and she watched and waited. It took 40 minutes. Then she heard Cole behind her make a sound that wasn't quite a word, and she turned, and he was pointing down at the ranch, and she turned back and she saw it. Mateo standing at the well drawing a bucket, and even from this distance she could see the way the bucket came up. Faster, fuller. She pressed her hand over her mouth, held it there. Cole said, "You did it." She didn't answer immediately. She stood there on the ridge in the August heat with bleeding hands and aching arms, and looked at the well that held everything, and thought about a man currently riding hard toward Santa Fe with a folder of documentation that she had helped put together, fighting for a piece of land she had no claim to, and she understood something with a clarity that was almost physical. She had stopped being a visitor sometime in the last 3 weeks. She didn't know the exact moment. She couldn't have pointed to the specific day or conversation or small domestic act that had moved her from passing through to belonging here. It had happened the way the water moved gradually underground, invisible, until suddenly it wasn't. She was still standing there when she heard the hoofbeats. She turned. Caleb was coming up the road. 11 days. He'd said 2 weeks, and he'd made it in 11 days, which meant he'd pushed hard and slept little and trusted her to hold things until he could get back. She started down the ridge. He saw her coming before she reached the fence. She watched him see her the specific moment when he registered where she was, what she was carrying, the state of her hands and her clothes, and probably her face. And she watched something move across his expression that he didn't manage to close down in time. He dismounted at the fence. They were 10 feet apart. "You look like you've been digging," he said. "I have," she said. "The well was dropping. I found the secondary source. I redirected the flow." He looked past her at the ridge, looked back at her. You did that yourself. Cole helped. He was quiet for a moment, processing, measuring the weight of what she'd done while he was gone, not just the water work, but all of it. The riders, the fence, the legal standoff, the daily management of a ranch that wasn't hers. The Santa Fe filing, she said. How did it go? It went, he said. The territorial office accepted the water system claim. Voss's county proceedings are suspended pending territorial review. A pause. It could take months to resolve completely, but Voss can't move on the land while it's under territorial jurisdiction. She breathed. So we bought time, she said. We bought time, he agreed. He said we like it was simply accurate. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them looked away, and the thing that had been building between them for 3 weeks through well cranks and fence lines and legal documents and morning coffee and evening porches and everything unsaid that had shaped every conversation they'd actually had pressed against the air between them like water against a door. Caleb, she said. Yeah, he said, like he already knew. I went through your desk while you were gone. He almost smiled. I know. I asked you to. And I reorganized your water schedule. I noticed. And I threatened your neighbor's foreman with a territorial land ordinance. Mateo told me. Now he did smile. Just slightly. In the letter he sent, that was supposedly not about anything alarming. She looked at him. I wasn't supposed to alarm you. I know, he said. That's what alarmed me. She laughed. A real one. Short and surprised and entirely genuine, and she saw the way it landed on him, the way he looked at her when she laughed like a man watching something he wasn't sure he was allowed to want and had stopped being able to pretend he didn't. Your hands are bleeding, he said. I know. He reached out and took her hand. Just held it lightly, looking at the torn skin across her palm, with an expression she recognized now as the way he looked at things that mattered to him. Carefully, without looking away. Thank you, he said. Not for the well. She understood that. Not for any specific thing. For staying. Her throat tightened in the specific way it did when something was too true to answer simply. Don't thank me, she said. I still don't know what I'm doing here. Yes, you do, he said quietly. He was still holding her hand. She looked at where his hand held hers, his rough and weathered hers, cut and dirty. And she thought about her father saying, the water knows where it wants to go. And she thought about a woman on a dying horse 3 weeks ago, who had absolutely no intention of stopping. And she thought about how the most important things never asked permission. They just arrived. And if you were paying attention, if you were the kind of person who checked things carefully and didn't look away from what mattered, you recognized them. She didn't pull her hand back. Mateo called from the kitchen doorway. Supper in 20 minutes. Mr. Morgan, welcome home. Caleb finally looked away from her toward the ranch. Yeah, he said. Home. He said it like it was simple. It was the most complicated word she'd heard in years. The first thing Caleb did the morning after he came home was walk the fence line. She heard him leave before light. Didn't hear him come back for 2 hours. When he finally came into the kitchen, he sat down across from her at the table and looked at her with the expression she'd learned to read as his version of something serious. 3 more sections on the north line, he said. Pulled not broken. Done while I was gone. She set her coffee down. When? Recent. Ground still disturbed. His jaw was tight in that specific way, not anger exactly, but the controlled version of it, the kind that had been held in check so long it had changed shape. He waited until I was out of the county. He knew you were gone, she said. Harnett came the day after you left. He saw me here instead of you. Caleb looked at her. You didn't put that in the letter. No. Why? Because you needed to focus on Santa Fe, not on what was happening here. She held his gaze. I handled it. He was quiet for a moment. Not the comfortable quiet, the other kind, the kind that meant he was deciding something. I don't like not knowing what's happening on my own land, Evelyn. I know, she said. And I don't like making that call. But I'd make it again. She paused. Because the Santa Fe filing was more important than the fence line, and you would have rushed back if I'd told you, and rushing back would have cost you the filing. He looked at her steadily. She looked back. Neither of them blinked. You were right, he said finally. It came out like a man putting something down he'd been carrying at arm's length. Not easy, but honest. I know, she said. That doesn't make it feel better. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, the shape of one. No, he agreed. It doesn't. Mateo set 2 plates on the table and said absolutely nothing, which was how she knew he'd been listening to every word. The territorial review moved faster than anyone expected, which turned out to be the first sign that something was wrong. Caleb got the letter on a Monday, 8 days after he'd returned, 12 days after the Santa Fe filing. The letter was from the Territorial Land Office, and it was written in the careful, neutral language of official correspondence, which meant it took her 3 readings to understand what it actually said. She read it the second time while Caleb read it the first time, and they reached the same conclusion at approximately the same moment. They're not reviewing the claim, she said. No, he said. They're reviewing the survey. She set the letter on the table. Her survey. The documentation she'd built from her father's methods, the hand-drawn maps, the measurements from the ridge. The thing that had turned a county fence dispute into a territorial water rights case. Someone in Santa Fe had challenged the methodology. Harnett, she said. Has to be. Caleb's voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath it now. She'd been around him long enough to hear the layers. He filed a challenge to the survey methodology within 24 hours of our claim being accepted. The Territorial Office is required to suspend the claim review until the methodology dispute is resolved. How long does a methodology dispute take? He looked at her. 6 months. Minimum. The kitchen went completely still. 6 months. The end of the summer, all of autumn, halfway through winter. 6 months during which the territorial protection on the land was suspended, and Voss could resume county proceedings, and the fence line would keep getting pulled, and the pressure would keep building, and Caleb would be standing exactly where he'd been standing the day she rode in alone, holding on the well. The only thing between him and losing everything. The survey methodology, she said slowly. What exactly did Harnett challenge? Caleb slid a second document across the table. It was the formal challenge filing. She read it carefully, and as she read, something cold and specific settled in her chest. Harnett had challenged her credentials. Not the measurements, not the geological analysis, not the water flow calculations. Those he conceded in careful legal language appeared sound. He had challenged the fact that the survey had been conducted by a woman with no formal certification, no professional license, no institutional affiliation. He had argued that the Territorial Land Office could not accept as primary evidence a survey conducted by an uncredentialed individual whose expertise rested solely on personal testimony about her father's methods. He had, in 4 paragraphs of clean legal prose, erased her. She put the document down. Caleb was watching her. She could feel it without looking up. He's not wrong, she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. Legally, I have no credentials. My father never formally certified me. Everything I know I learned standing next to him, and there's no paper that says so. What you found is real, Caleb said. Immediate, certain. The well's holding. The water's moving. That's not a theory, Evelyn, that's not the point. She finally looked at him. The point is, what a territorial judge will accept as evidence. And a judge who's looking for a reason to rule against us, or a judge who Voss has had supper with twice a month, will look at my name on that survey and find exactly what Harnett found. Caleb pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window. Stood there with his back to her. She could see the tension in his shoulders from across the room, the specific set of a man who was furious and disciplined enough not to show it as fury. There has to be a way to certify it, he said. The nearest certified water surveyor is in Santa Fe. Then we get him out here, to countersign a survey done by an uncredentialed woman. She paused. If he agrees to do that at all, it costs money we haven't discussed, and it takes time we may not have. He turned from the window. How much time? She looked at the letter again. The methodology challenge suspends the territorial review for 30 days pending a response. If we don't file a response that satisfies the challenge in 30 days, the suspension becomes permanent pending a full hearing. 30 days. 29 now. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his hat from the hook by the door. I'm going to Redvale. For what? Because there's a man there. Surveyor named Aldrich, the clerk's brother-in-law. He's certified. He's been in this valley 30 years. He paused at the door. And he has a grudge against Harlan Voss that goes back to a property deal in 1878 that everyone in Redvale knows about and nobody talks about. She stared at him. You've known about this man the whole time. I knew about him, Caleb said. I didn't know I'd need him. I thought your survey would be enough. He said it plainly without apology. I was wrong about that. I should have thought further ahead. We both should have, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Two people sharing the weight of a mistake without dropping it on each other. I'll be back by nightfall, he said. I'll be here, she said. He left. She sat at the table with the documents and the cold coffee and the specific feeling of having built something carefully and watched someone else find the crack in it she hadn't seen. She was not a person who fell apart over setbacks. She'd learned that the hard way in a different kind of loss, and the lesson had held. But she sat there for a few honest minutes and felt the full weight of it before she put it down and started thinking about what came next. Mateo brought fresh coffee without being asked. He'll get Aldrich, Mateo said. You know about Aldrich. Everybody in 30 miles knows about Aldrich. Voss bought water access from him in 1878 under terms that Aldrich later said were misrepresented. Aldrich couldn't prove it. Lost a good piece of his survey business because Voss's people spread word that he was difficult to work with. Mateo sat down. That man has been waiting 9 years for something that makes Harlan Voss look small. She looked at him. You might have mentioned this. Caleb likes to come to things himself, Mateo said simply. If I'd mentioned it, it would have been my idea. This way it's his. She stared at him. You're a much more complicated man than you look, Mateo. He smiled. Thank you, Miss Harper. Caleb came back at dusk with Aldrich. The surveyor was 60 wiry, with the kind of face that had been outdoors in hard weather for decades, and had decided to just accept it. He walked with a slight limp and carried a bag of survey instruments that looked older than he did and better maintained. He came into the kitchen, accepted Mateo's coffee, and sat down across from Evelyn with the documents she'd prepared spread on the table between them. He read for 20 minutes without speaking. Nobody interrupted him. When he finished, he looked at Evelyn over the top of the papers, with eyes that were sharp and direct, and entirely without the condescension she'd braced for. Your triangulation methodology, he said. Who taught you the angle compensation for slope variance? My father, she said. He adapted it from a technique he learned from a Mexican water surveyor in Sonora in 1861. Aldrich nodded slowly. I know that technique. Saw it used once. Almost nobody uses it north of the border. He looked at the maps again. Your measurements are precise to within acceptable variance. The geological interpretation is sound. A pause. And you found the secondary source? Yes. And redirected it? Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Caleb. The challenge to her credentials is technically valid under territorial filing rules. But those rules were written to exclude fraud, not competence. He tapped the documents. This is competent work, better than competent. He paused. I'll countersign the survey, and I'll submit a professional affidavit attesting to the methodology's validity. Caleb let out a breath. What do you need? 2 days to do my own site verification. I don't countersign anything I haven't checked myself. He looked back at Evelyn. I want you with me when I do it. You know the site. You know the flow direction. We'll move faster if you're there." "I'll be there," she said. Aldrich picked up his coffee cup. "One other thing." He looked between them. "Harnett is good. He'll file a secondary challenge the minute this one is resolved. You need to be ready for that." "What kind of secondary challenge?" Caleb said. "Chain of title on the secondary source." Aldrich set his cup down. "If Voss can argue that the ridgeland where the secondary source sits has any ambiguity in your original claim boundary, he can try to claim the source separately from the well. Cut the feed without touching the well itself." The silence in the kitchen had weight. "The cottonwood markers," Evelyn said. "Yes," Aldrich said. "The fourth tree." Caleb's jaw went tight. She felt it without looking at him. "Is there any way to establish the original boundary line without the markers?" she asked. Aldrich thought about it. "Survey stakes. If there were original survey stakes placed when the claim was filed, those would establish the line independent of the markers. The stakes themselves are the legal boundary. The tree was only a visual reference." "Are there stakes?" she asked Caleb. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "I know where they should be if they were placed. I've never looked." Aldrich looked at him steadily. "Then I suggest you look." After Aldrich left to set up in the barn, he'd accepted a night's accommodation with the ease of a man accustomed to field work. Caleb went out to the east boundary in the last of the evening light. Evelyn went with him. Neither of them discussed it. He went and she followed, and they walked the eastern line in silence, while the light died around them, both of them watching the ground. It was she who found the first stake, iron half buried, almost completely obscured by 2 decades of encroaching grass and packed earth. She nearly walked past it. But something about the slightly different color of the soil caught her. She'd spent enough time lately looking at ground with intention that she saw things other people didn't, and she crouched down and pushed the grass aside, and there it was. "Here," she said. Caleb was beside her immediately. He crouched down and looked at it, and didn't say anything for a long moment. "How old is that?" she asked. "Original claim filing was 1875, he said. "That stake's been here since then." He looked up at her. His face in the near dark was something she'd memorized without meaning to the angle of his jaw, the specific light in his eyes that meant he was feeling something real and deciding how much of it to let out. 8 years. I walked past that stake 8 years of fence checks and never saw it. You weren't looking for it. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. He looked at the stake, then at her. We need to find the others. We'll find them tomorrow with Aldrich. Better light, better documentation. She stood. Caleb, this is the boundary line. Independent of the cottonwoods, independent of Harnett's challenge. This is proof. He stood too. They were close in the near dark the way people got when the light went, and there was only the one small radius of each other to orient by. You found the water, he said. You found the stake. I was looking, she said. Why? His voice was quiet, not accusatory. The real version of the question, the one he'd been not asking for weeks, in the careful way he didn't ask things until he was sure he meant them. You could have left. The shoe was fixed. The legal situation was something I'd have figured out eventually. Why are you still here, Evelyn? She could have given him a practical answer. She was done with practical answers. Because this place got into me, she said, and I stopped wanting to get it out. He was very still. I haven't asked you to stay, he said. Careful. The way he was careful with the things that mattered. I know, she said. You're the most careful man I've ever known about asking for things. Is that a complaint? No, she said. It's the opposite of a complaint. The dark had fully arrived. The stars were out over New Mexico territory, in the way they got out here, indifferent and magnificent. The sky, a fact rather than a backdrop. The iron stake was at their feet, and the ranch was behind them, and the well was holding, and somewhere 6 miles east, Harlan Voss was planning his next move. And none of that was resolved, and all of it was real. And Caleb Morgan reached out and took her hand, the same way he'd held her bleeding hand when he came home. Careful, complete, like a man who'd decided and was done pretending otherwise. She held his hand back. They stood there at the boundary line of his land in the dark, and neither of them said anything else, because the important things had been said, and the rest of it all. The rest of it was simply what came next. When they walked back to the ranch, they walked close enough that their shoulders touched. Mateo was on the porch. He looked at them coming across the dark yard together and looked away immediately at the middle distance, which was the most elaborate display of minding his own business she had ever witnessed. "Coffee's hot," he said. "Thank you, Mateo," Caleb said. They went inside. She sat at the table, and he sat across from her, and Mateo poured 3 cups and sat down too, and they talked through the plan for the next day, Aldrich, the site verification, the stake locations, the documentation sequence, with the practical focus of people who had real work in front of them and knew how to meet it. But under the table, Caleb's boot was touching hers, and neither of them moved it. And Mateo, who noticed everything, looked at his coffee cup and said nothing at all. And the night went on around Morgan Creek Ranch, the way nights did, the well holding the water moving underground toward everything that needed it, the land doing what it did when someone paid attention to it. Surviving. And more than surviving. She reached for her coffee. Her hand was steady. Her heart was not. But she had stopped needing her heart to be steady. She had stopped needing everything to be controlled and concluded and safe before she let herself be in it. The water didn't wait for permission. Neither she was finding, did she? Aldrich found all 4 stakes. It took the better part of 2 days, him and Evelyn working the eastern boundary, in the August heat, Caleb following with the documentation notebook, Cole running measurements between points. But by the end of the second afternoon, every original iron stake from the 1875 filing had been located, photographed in relation to fixed geological markers, and entered into a formal survey record that Aldrich signed with his full professional credentials, and the specific satisfaction of a man settling a 9-year score. "That's your boundary line," Aldrich said when the last stake was recorded. "Clean, independent. Not a tree in the world can touch it." Caleb looked at the completed record. Then he looked at Evelyn. She understood the look. It was the one he used when something mattered more than he had words for, and he decided not to pretend otherwise. "We need to get this to Santa Fe," she said. "Tomorrow," Aldrich said. "I'll ride with you. My affidavit goes with the survey, or it doesn't go at all. I want to hand it to the territorial clerk myself and watch him sign the receipt." Caleb extended his hand. Aldrich shook it, the grip of 2 men who'd done something real together, and both knew it. "I owe you," Caleb said. Aldrich glanced at Evelyn. "Thank her. She did the work I put my name on." He picked up his bag. "I'll be ready at first light." He walked back toward the barn, and they stood at the boundary line as the day cooled around them, the 4 iron stakes at their feet, like punctuation on something finally said. "It's going to hold," she said, not a question. "It's going to hold," he said. The same certainty he'd always put into those words, the same quiet weight. Except now, she knew what it cost him to carry that certainty, and what it meant that he never put it down. They rode to Santa Fe the next morning. All 3 of them, Caleb, Evelyn, and Aldrich and Mateo, stood at the fence and watched them go, with his hands in his pockets, and an expression that was trying very hard not to be emotional and failing completely. The Territorial Land Office was a 2-story building on the main plaza that smelled of paper and authority in equal measure. The clerk behind the counter was a young man with ink-stained fingers and the careful manner of someone who understood that what passed through his hands mattered. He looked at Aldrich's credentials first, then at the survey documentation, then at the stake record. He read everything slowly and completely, the way a careful man reads things he knows he'll be asked about later. When he finished, he looked up. "This resolves the methodology challenge," he said. "Yes," Aldrich said. "And the boundary documentation addresses the potential title ambiguity." "Completely," Evelyn said. The clerk looked at her. not dismissively with the reassessment of a man updating an initial assumption. He looked back at the documents. Who conducted the original water source survey? I did, she said. He looked at Aldrich. And you're certifying this work? I'm certifying that the methodology is sound, the measurements are accurate, and the conclusions are correct, Aldrich said. My professional reputation is attached to that statement. Another pause. The clerk turned to a ledger, dipped his pen, and began writing with the slow, deliberate movements of official action. The territorial review of the Morgan Creek water rights claim is reinstated, he said without looking up. The challenge filed by Harnett on behalf of Voss Cattle Company is dismissed as resolved. He finished writing, blotted the page, looked up. Mr. Morgan, you'll receive written confirmation within 10 days. In the interim, the territorial protection on your claim is in effect. Caleb said, thank you. Just that. 2 words, plain and complete. They walked out into the Santa Fe sun and stood on the plaza, and for a moment, none of them said anything. Then Aldrich said, I'd like a drink. Caleb almost laughed. So would I. Not me, Evelyn said. I want to go home. She said it before she'd decided to say it. Home. The word out in the open air between them, before she could qualify it, or soften it, or turn it into something safer. Caleb looked at her. She looked back at him. Aldrich looked between them with the expression of a man who had walked into something that had very little to do with water rights and was gracious enough to pretend otherwise. I'll find my own drink, Aldrich said pleasantly and walked away. Caleb and Evelyn stood on the plaza. Home, he said. I said it, she said. You meant it. Yes. She held his gaze. I meant it. He nodded once, the slow, certain nod of a man receiving information he'd already believed but needed to hear spoken. Then he said, Let's go then. They rode back. The return was different from any ride she'd taken in years. Not because the road changed. Because she did the subtle interior shift of a person moving toward something, rather than away from it, the specific weight of direction when you finally had one. She'd spent 2 years on the wrong side of that feeling. She recognized the right side when it arrived. They made camp that night at the halfway point, the 3 of them, around a fire that Caleb built with the efficiency of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Aldrich told stories about survey work in the 1860s. The early territorial days, the water wars that had shaped half the land claims in New Mexico. And his voice had the rhythm of someone who'd lived long enough to find the hard things funny. Evelyn sat with her knees pulled up and listened, and felt the specific contentment of a person who is exactly where they should be. Caleb sat close to her. Not dramatically. Just close the way people sat when they'd stopped pretending distance was comfortable. When Aldrich finally rolled into his blanket and went quiet, they sat by the dying fire, and the dark of the territory came down around them, enormous and indifferent and magnificent. When we get back, Caleb said. She waited. There are things I want to say. You can say them now, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. I'm better at saying things when I'm on my own land. She looked at him sideways. You've been saying things on your own land for 5 weeks, and you've said approximately 11 words about what you actually mean. He made that sound again, the one that wasn't quite a laugh, but lived next door to one. That's fair. It is. He looked at the fire. I'm not good at this. At what? At? He stopped. Started again. I built that ranch to be sufficient. I built it so it didn't need anything outside itself. I told myself that was strength. He paused. I've been telling myself that for 8 years. She waited. And then you rode in on a dying horse, he said. And in 5 weeks you fixed my well and found my water and saved my boundary line and turned a county dispute into a territorial claim and... He stopped. Looked at her directly. And the ranch is more itself with you in it than it's ever been. And so am I. The fire was almost out. The stars were doing their vast indifferent thing overhead. Caleb, she said. Yeah. That was more than 11 words. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Stay. Not because of the ranch. Not because of the water, or the legal fight, or because I need someone to fix the well crank." His voice dropped to the register it went to when he was saying something he'd decided completely. "Stay, because I want you there. Because the place is different when you're in it, and I don't want to go back to how it was before." She looked at him, at this man who had stayed when no one would have blamed him for leaving, who had built something real from rock and stubbornness and the daily refusal to give up, who held things carefully because he understood that the things worth holding required that. "I stopped leaving," she said, "the day you stopped asking me to." He reached over and took her hand. He held it like he'd held it at the boundary line completely without apology. And she held his back, and the fire went down to coals, and neither of them needed to say anything else that night, because everything that needed saying had been said in the only language either of them had ever really trusted. The language of showing up. They rode into Morgan Creek Ranch the next afternoon. Mateo was at the gate. He had the expression of a man who had been doing an excellent job of not caring how things turned out, and had completely failed at it. "Well," he said. "The claims reinstated," Caleb said. "Territorial protection in effect. Harnet's challenge dismissed." Mateo closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, he had reorganized his face into something more composed. "Good. Supper's almost ready." He turned back toward the kitchen. "Mateo," Evelyn said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for everything while he was gone, both times." Mateo looked at her with the expression he'd been using on her since the first day, the one that said he'd known something was true before she did, and had been patient enough to let her figure it out herself. "Thank you for staying," he said simply. He went inside. She dismounted and walked Dusty to the trough, and the mare drank the way she always drank here, without hurry, without the desperate relief of an animal, uncertain of its next drink. Just steady, trusting, the way an animal drank when it had learned that a place was safe. Evelyn stood at the trough and looked at the well. The water level was holding. More than holding, since she'd redirected the secondary source 3 weeks ago. The level had been consistently higher than Caleb's 8-year records showed it had ever been in summer. The drought hadn't broken, the heat hadn't relented, and the well was fuller than it had been in years. She'd done that, not alone. She'd done it with Cole's shovels and Mateo's patience and her father's methods and Caleb's trust. But she'd done it. She was still standing there when she heard Caleb come up behind her. "Water's good," he said. "I know." She turned to look at him. "I want to expand the channel. Add a second redirect point before autumn. If we do it right, the system will be self-sustaining through a full dry season without any manual intervention." He looked at her with an expression she'd only recently learned to read fully. It was the look he used when something made him certain about a thing he'd been approaching carefully. "All right," he said. "It'll take a week of work." "All right. And I want to document it properly this time. Full survey record from the start, so there's no question of credentials or methodology if it ever needs to stand up legally again." "All right." A pause. "Evelyn?" "What?" "I said all right 3 times. I noticed." "That means stop planning for 10 minutes, he said, "and just be here." She looked at him. He looked back steady and unhurried, the way he always was. The way she'd learned was not the absence of feeling, but the most deliberate possible expression of it. She let out a breath she'd been holding for approximately 2 years. "All right," she said. He almost smiled. The real one. The one she'd been collecting since the first time she'd seen it, rare and complete, the smile of a man who didn't give them out lightly and meant everyone. They were still standing at the well when the letter came. Cole brought it from Redvale the following morning. Official Post Territorial Office seal, the written confirmation the clerk had promised within 10 days. It had arrived in 7. Caleb opened it at the kitchen table. He read it once, slid it across to her without a word. She read it. The language was formal and complete and entirely unambiguous. The Morgan Creek water rights claim was confirmed under territorial jurisdiction. The secondary water source documented in the survey, conducted in August 1883, was formally included within the claim boundary. Any future challenge to the claim would require territorial standing, not county. The Voss Cattle Company's proceedings were closed. At the bottom, in the clerk's careful hand, a notation she hadn't expected. Survey methodology certified by G. Aldrich. Licensed territorial surveyor. Original documentation by E. Harper. Designation noted for record. Her name. In the official territorial record. Not erased. Not dismissed. Present and permanent and noted. She set the letter down. Mateo, who had been reading over her shoulder, in the most transparent possible display of not reading over her shoulder she'd ever witnessed, made a sound that was not quite a word and turned very quickly back to the stove. E. Harper, Caleb said. That's my name, she said. It's in the territorial record. It appears so. He looked at her across the table. It'll be there 100 years from now. Long after Voss is gone. Long after Harnet's forgotten. Long after anyone remembers the fight. He paused. Your name on this land. Permanent. She understood what he was saying. It wasn't about the letter. Caleb, she said. I'm not asking you because of the record, he said, immediate, clear. I want that understood first. I understand. I'm asking because the answer to every question I've had since August has been you. He held her gaze with the specific directness he used for the things he'd decided completely. I'm asking because I built this place to last, and I want to build the rest of it the same way. With you. The kitchen was very quiet. Mateo had stopped pretending to cook. Cole, she realized, was visible through the window, suddenly very interested in the fence post he'd been walking past for the last 5 minutes. She looked at Caleb Morgan, this man who had stood at a fence line and said, "The well holds," like it was a simple fact, and had spent 8 years making it true through nothing but refusal and daily showing up, and the stubborn grace of a person who understood that the things worth having required that you never stop choosing them. She thought about the woman who had ridden in here 40 days ago with everything she owned in 2 saddlebags and no intention of stopping. She thought about what that woman had been running from and what she'd been running toward without knowing it, and the particular mercy of a dying horse that had made the decision for her before she could make the wrong one herself. She thought about her father's hands pressed flat against the earth listening for water. The water knows where it wants to go. Yes, she said. Just that, plain and complete and certain the way the best things were. Caleb let out a breath. Mateo set down a pan with a clang that was either an accident or the most restrained celebration she'd ever witnessed, and said with his back to them, "I'll make something good for supper." "Thank you, Mateo," Caleb said. "Thank you, Mateo," she said. "Don't thank me," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. "I knew from the first morning." Caleb reached across the table and took both her hands, the ones that had found his water and mapped his land, and held his legal fight together and dug into his ridge in the August heat until the ground gave back what it had been holding. He held them the way he held everything that mattered, carefully, completely, like a man who knew the difference between what lasted and what didn't, and had made his choice. She looked at their hands together on the table. Then she looked at him. "The well channel expansion," she said. "We start Monday." He looked at her. "There's work to do," she said. "There's always work to do. That's not going to change." "No," he said. "It's not." "Good." She turned her hands over and held his back, and the grip was firm and equal, the grip of 2 people who understood each other. "Then let's not waste the daylight." Outside, the August sun pressed down on Morgan Creek Ranch, the way it always had. Relentless, indifferent, the same heat that had been burning this land before either of them arrived, and would burn it long after. The well held. The water moved underground through the channel she'd opened, feeding everything that needed feeding, the way it had always wanted to. Dusty stood at the trough and drank without hurry. The kitchen garden was coming in stronger than it had in years. The fence lines were sound, and in the territorial records of New Mexico, in the careful handwriting of a clerk who understood that what passed through his hands mattered, the name E. Harper was written into the land, alongside the name of the man who had built it permanent and present, and belonging there as surely as the iron stakes that had been in the ground since 1875, waiting for someone to look in the right place and find them. Some things were always there. They just needed someone who knew how to look. Evelyn Harper had ridden into Morgan Creek Ranch on a dying horse with nowhere left to go, and she had looked at the land, at the water, at the man who refused to stop choosing the thing he'd built, and what she found, there was not a place to stop running. It was the reason she had been running in the first place. She just hadn't known it yet. Now she did, and the well held, and the water ran, and Morgan Creek Ranch stood in the summer of 1883, with its fence line straight, and its claim secure, and two people inside it who had chosen each other the way the water chose its path, not by force, not by accident, but by the stubborn and patient and entirely certain logic of finding the place where everything finally made sense and refusing to leave. That was enough. That was everything.